Shalom. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. Times are, of course, challenging, and we all experience a great deal of uncertainty and vagueness. Nevertheless, as president of the University of Haifa, and despite the irregular circumstances, I am excited to open the 2021 First Board of Governors meeting. I'm sure you'll all agree that we could not think of a more honorable and uplifting way to do so than with the conferment of an honorary doctorate upon Professor Larry Bacow, president of Harvard University. The University of Haifa, under the vision of the multiversity, takes upon itself a national mission to be the entrance gate to the Israeli creative class and to be an efficient tool for social mobility within Israeli society. That said, in the past 50 years, the University of Haifa is also a leading force in a variety of scientific disciplines in which we are also partnering with Harvard faculty for over a decade. We take pride in nationally and globally leading in marine research, education, health and social sciences, as well as the humanities. We invite you all to learn more about what we teach and research. I'm sure you'll be impressed. Now, it's my pleasure to invite the University of Haifa's Chairman of the Board of Governors, my friend Brad Bloom, to welcome you all.
Thank you, President Robin. While we are living in strange and challenging times, this is also an opportunity to reflect on our values and priorities. In fact, the decision to honor President Bacow's lifetime of achievements virtually was in part recognition of its importance to us. So while we can't celebrate together in person, we have attempted to personalize the session as much as possible. With the exception of President Robin, the other 5 participants have all known President Bacow for many years and consider ourselves the beneficiaries of his leadership and friendship. And of course, we all share active roles at the University of Haifa. Professor Fred Tauber, my president as chair of the Board of Governors, will read the scroll. He previously served on the Board of Trustees of Tufts University when President Bacow was president there. Professor Deborah Schmueli, a former student of President Bacow's, will moderate the conversation. In a sense, she represents the thousands of students who have benefited from his teaching, guidance, and leadership. No pressure there, Professor Schmueli. Shira and Jay Ruderman, longtime benefactors of our university, our community colleagues and friends of our honoree from Boston. My own relationship with President Bacow began with his service on Harvard's governing board and continued when he was elected the 29th president of Harvard University. Having seen President Bacow from afar in his roles at MIT and Tufts, and closer up at Harvard, it was obvious to me that we should honor his lifetime of achievement. And that was 18 months ago. He would probably tell us that his second lifetime began about 14 months ago and already seems longer than his first. Since then, his leadership at Harvard in the field of education and throughout the world, combating the pandemic and protecting those most at risk, would certainly qualify him for a second honorary degree. Alas, President Bacow, we only have one to offer you today, but perhaps we can arrange something special when you visit your new alma mater in Israel. When you do visit, we look forward to sharing the progress and the many collaborations already underway between our faculties, including one of my favorite research projects that aspires to conduct two-way communication with large sea mammals. Those collaborations are a reflection of our shared goals and values. Both universities are committed to diversity, and in fact, the University of Haifa is the most diverse academic institution in Israel and one of the most in the world. And we both understand that diversity is not an end in itself, but rather reflects our belief that tolerance leads to greater academic excellence, discovery, and innovation. Yet we also know that the progress we seek, particularly in the sciences, must be balanced with excellence in the humanities and social sciences to sustain and assure open, free, and civil societies. President Bacow has led by example in these matters throughout his long and distinguished career. It is our very special privilege to honor him this evening. President Robin.
Thank you, Brad. So, ladies and gentlemen, until you come visit us in person, let us show you who we are and where we are heading.
A commitment to progress means constantly pushing ahead, looking for answers to questions that have yet to be asked, being creative, and sometimes swimming against the current. We at the University of Haifa are committed to progress and to offering pioneering solutions to the challenges of the 21st century. A commitment to society means impacting people, communities, and our environment, providing access to opportunities that promote social mobility, accepting the differences and uniqueness of all individuals, because diversity makes for better science. We at the University of Haifa, the most pluralistic campus in Israel, are committed to creating a better society and to serve as an engine of social mobility in northern Israel and nationwide. We at the University of Haifa are committed.
And now to the moment we've all been waiting for. I am very proud and honored to be introducing Harvard University's 29th president, Professor Larry Bacow. President Bacow earned his SB in economics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT as we call them, and his JD, MPP, and PhD from Harvard Law School and Harvard's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. After serving as a faculty member at MIT for 24 years and its chancellor for 4 years, he was elected president of Tufts University, where he served for 10 years. In 2010, Bacow was appointed by former President Barack Obama to the Board of Advisors for the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. In 2018, 7 years after he became a Harvard board member, Bacow was named the 29th president of Harvard. The University of Haifa is delighted to celebrate Larry Bacow.
President Larry Bacow's diverse academic interests all share the overarching goal of improving society. Bacow's family is the embodiment of the American dream.
My parents were both immigrants, both refugees. My mother came from a small town in Germany. She was a survivor of Auschwitz, sadly the only member of her family and the only Jew from her town to survive the war. My father was born in Minsk. His family came before the war, but to escape the pogroms of Eastern Europe. I've often said that America is a remarkable place. Where else in the world can you go, literally in one generation from off the boat, to enjoy the kind of life and opportunity that my parents enjoyed and certainly that I've enjoyed as well.
For more than 3 decades, President Bacow has been committed to advancing academic excellence and expanding access to higher education, firmly believing that higher education is the engine that drives social mobility and social justice.
I think that if we truly embrace excellence, we must also embrace diversity. Diversity of thought, diversity of ideas. Truth needs to be distinguished from facts. Truth is contested, it needs to be revealed, and the only way we can do that is if we are willing to have difficult conversations with people who think differently from us. We educate our students not just for the labor force, but also to be citizens in a democracy. You do it by encouraging people to raise their sights for themselves, but also for the institution. And then I think we do it by also trying to insist upon excellence in virtually everything that we do.
In 2018, he was appointed the 29th president of Harvard University. This evening, the University of Haifa is proud to confer a Doctor of Philosophy, honoris causa, to President Larry Bacow.
For the conferment ceremony, it is my distinct pleasure to present the 29th President of Harvard University, Lawrence Larry Bacow, and Adele Fleet Bacow, who will be hooding her husband on our behalf. Professor Fred Tauber, the University of Haifa's former chairman of the Board of Governors, will be reading the scroll simultaneously.
Larry, greetings from Jerusalem. I am delighted to be able to participate in this Tri-City celebration of your honorary doctorate. Our many years of friendship make this event particularly meaningful and important for me, and I trust for you. The Senate of the University of Haifa, by virtue of the authority vested in it by the Constitution of the University, and in accordance with the recommendations of the President and the Executive Committee, hereby confers upon Lawrence S. Bacow the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, honoris causa. In recognition of his distinguished academic career and extraordinary leadership in the world of higher education and beyond, for setting the highest standards for civil discourse and mutual respect based on the traditions of Emet and Veritas, and for bringing his exceptional talents to confront boldly the major challenges of our time and lighting the path forward for all. Mazel tov.
I want to begin by thanking Fred Tauber for conferring my degree. Fred is a great scholar and a longtime friend. And I also note with pride that he was a trustee of Tufts University during my time there as president. Thanks also to Ron Rubin, my esteemed presidential colleague, and to Brad Bloom, a distinguished and active Harvard alum, and to Jay and Shira Rudderman for making this moment possible. I also want to thank Professor Deborah Schmueli, my former student from my MIT days, for the conversation that will follow this talk. I'm deeply grateful that all of our lives have intersected in so many wonderful ways over so many years. Your partnership, your friendship have been a gift to me. Thank you very, very much.
And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to invite Professor Larry Bacow to speak with us about tireless pursuits, the research university in the age of COVID, followed by a Q&A session moderated by our own Professor Deborah Schmueli. Professor Bacow, the floor is yours.
Symbols have been on my mind since I read last month of your joint discovery of what is likely the world's oldest known engraving. 120,000 years is in many ways unfathomable. But it does tell us something important about the urge to communicate. Zoom is as ancient as it is modern, and I'm grateful for this technology that lets us all share in this moment today. However, it goes without saying that I wish all of us could be together in Eretz Yisrael. I must say that my wife Adele and I were so looking forward to coming back to Israel for this event. In 1981, 40 years ago this year, which I can scarcely believe, we spent 6 wonderful years on my very first sabbatical at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. That experience was my first encounter with a wonderful tradition, at least in Jerusalem in the summer of Hafsakah. It was truly a revelation to have a moment at midday for relaxation and renewal, a moment to consider life not in retrospect or in prospect, but as I was actually living it. I actually tried my best to popularize the practice in the United States, first pitching it at MIT when I returned, and then at Tufts, and more recently at Harvard. But as we all know, change comes slowly to higher education. Now that I'm an official alum of the University of Haifa with all the rights and privileges, you may well run into me at one of your campuses in the near future, I hope. In the meantime, memories of our sabbatical, our wonderful time in Israel, as well as our subsequent trips, including lots of mementos in this house, the president's residence at Harvard, will have to suffice. If I can't be in Haifa, Boston is truly the next best place to be. Your city and my own have deep and very special ties. The combined Jewish philanthropies, the Boston-Haifa connection, Brad Bloom, Fred Tauber, Shira and Jay Rudderman. We're incredibly fortunate to be connected in so many ways and through the work of so many extraordinary people. This gathering is a celebration of those long-standing ties. On a personal level, in 2005, when I was president of Tufts, I had the privilege of working together with your then president, Aharon Ben-Zev, to help create the Talwar network of engaged universities. Originally, there were 26 institutions from around the world that agreed to work together to promote the social and civic responsibilities of higher education. Now there are more than 400 institutions that belong to the Talwar network. Tufts and the University of Haifa, I'm proud to say, were founding members. Reminding ourselves of goodness is one of the most important things that we can do to maintain hope. It's hard to imagine that more than a year has passed since President Rubin met with me in my office here at Harvard to extend this invitation in person. I was thrilled to hear Ron describe his ambitious plans to create an inclusive multi-university to help realize what he refers to as the Israeli dream. He has called your university a crystal ball and said, and I quote, "If you want to gaze and see what the future of this country is going to look like, look to our university." Last February, I was growing eager to see your progress in person. Then the coronavirus started spreading rapidly. Then it reached America. Then it reached Massachusetts. We made the difficult decision to send our students home to finish the semester online. And on March 13th, 1 year and 2 days ago, I left my office in Harvard Yard and have been working remotely ever since. None of us could have predicted what has happened since. In Israel, more than 5,600 people have died. In the United States, more than 500,000 people have died. A grim milestone passed just last month. In the US, it feels as if everyone, all of us, knows someone who has lost a loved one to this disease. And family and friends are often made to grieve alone, deprived even of the few precious comforts that customary ways of mourning afford us. Heartbreak shadows every day. Alongside this immeasurable grief and loss, we continue to contend with gross inequalities and deep injustices that have been laid bare by this disease and exacerbated by bitter and combative politics. I need not recount to you the events of January 6th in my country and in our capital. The divisions that were made plain for our nation and to the world still threaten the underpinnings of our democracy. And that's to say nothing of the particular challenges facing higher education. Colleges and universities across the United States have cut 650,000 jobs in the last year. That's about 1 in 10 jobs in the entire higher education sector. Institutions continue to struggle with fulfilling their mission in the face of upheaval and uncertainty, and some of them may not survive these difficult months and years ahead. Despite it all, however, I remain optimistic because one aspect of the research university that has become clearer to me in the last year than it has ever been in my academic career, and that is, where else is failure embraced so widely and resilience valued so highly? Let me say a bit more about this. Scholarship and research demand an unfailing willingness to charge down dark alleys. Faculty are innately curious. They have big ideas, big hypotheses which they seek to test. They pursue these ideas in laboratories and libraries, on digs and in archives. Rarely do things work the first time. Experiments have to be redone, theories revised and reevaluated. The work of discovery and innovation requires persistence, requires dedication, curiosity, and creativity. Sometimes these efforts lead us in directions that never could have been predicted, and society is in the end far better off for it. These tireless pursuits have yielded over generations, in fact over centuries, the improvement and enrichment of humanity. They have given people around the world reason to hope for a deeper understanding, for greater knowledge, for better days ahead, for all of us and for all those who will follow us and take up the task of tikkun olam, of repairing the world. For the past year, I've watched with awe as members of our university community and research universities around the world who've worked literally around the clock to meet the challenges of this pandemic, to speed progress towards a future in which all of us are free in ways that, let's face it, we all once took for granted. At Harvard, people working on the front lines with patients in our affiliated hospitals and through research on the virus itself are changing the landscapes of medicine and science as the pandemic continues to evolve. Strong connections with our neighboring institutions have created unprecedented opportunities for collaboration in Boston. The Massachusetts Consortium on Pathogen Readiness, or Mass CPR as we call it, has connected and supported scientists and clinicians from Harvard, MIT, Boston University, Tufts University, the University of Massachusetts, as well as local biomedical research institutes, biotech companies, pharma, and academic medical centers. At the same time, researchers across the university are seeking to understand how humanity is responding to and coping with this disease, from newborn infants to the elderly and everyone in between, and making all of our lives, I hope, better in the process. Through it all, I have marveled at the perennial wisdom of supporting discovery, of continuing to ensure that questions are asked and answered for their own sake. I'm proud to say that 2 of the coronavirus vaccines currently in use, the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccines, have their origins in Harvard Medical School laboratories. The Moderna vaccine and a number of others now in use rely on messenger RNA to trigger an immune response and produce antibodies to fight the virus. The possibility of this mechanism began with basic research at a number of institutions around the world. But in the 1970s at MIT, Professor Philip Sharp and his colleagues were at the MIT Cancer Center were trying to figure out if cancers were caused by viruses, something that we now know is quite rare. They ended up discovering along the way the process of RNA splicing, a feat that ultimately resulted in a Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1993 for Phil Sharp and colleagues. It was that discovery that made possible the mRNA vaccines that are now in production today, and to do so in record time, in less than a year from start to finish. There's a lesson here, and the lesson is that fundamental curiosity-based discovery over 40 years later is now helping us to save humanity from the scourge of this disease. Other routes from idea to innovation are often more circuitous. If I can offer a lighter example closer to home for all of my friends in Israel. Consider Waze, the popular GPS traffic app that helps us all find how to get to where we want to go in the minimum amount of time. Today, it connects millions of people. What made such an innovation possible? Waze would not exist without GPS, and GPS would not exist with atomic clocks. It's actually our ability to measure time extraordinarily precisely that it allows us to determine the location of any point on the planet within a meter. And atomic clocks would not exist without Professor Norman Ramsey. In 1949, while a member of the Harvard faculty, Professor Ramsey developed the hydrogen maser, which made atomic timekeeping possible. In 1989, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. But it wasn't the promise of a prize or the founding of a company that would ultimately develop an app, something that was unknown in 1949, which motivated him as a young man. Far from it. Ramsey recalled that, in his words, when he learned that he could make a living studying how nature operates, he knew that was what he wanted to do. Right now, people at Harvard and at the University of Haifa, people around the world at institutions like ours, are being given a chance to follow their curiosity, just like Philip Sharp, just like Norman Ramsey. Not to reach some known 0.5 or 10 years hence, but to satisfy the deep urge to know and to understand, to expand and to deepen, to seek and to find. This is what scholarship ultimately is all about. The partnerships that exist between our two institutions in archaeology, education, environmental studies, and other areas have expanded the frontiers of knowledge. In our newest collaboration on the etiology of large marine mammals may change what we know about some of the most extraordinary animals on the planet. Research universities help us to figure out where we want to go, but more importantly, they help us to figure out why we actually want to get there. In the years to come, as we continue to face the challenges posed by climate change and inequality, we will see more and more the convergence of science and technology with philosophy and ethics and the humanities more broadly, creating spaces for the full consideration of what we in the present, what we here and now owe to those who will come in the future. Scholarship out of the University of Haifa just this last month on the failure of AI-designated algorithms to detect coded anti-Semitic language, in some cases simple word swaps, is a powerful example. Social media shapes opinions and perspectives around the world. Innovations created by people are works in progress, and our institutions can and should play a role in understanding how people can influence their beliefs and actions. Overcoming hate depends on what we do, not only with our hearts, but also what we do with our heads. In challenging times, the Research University, with all of its dark alleys and daring challenges, inspires action and illuminates a way forward for all of us. The suffering and uncertainty of the past year have almost been too great to bear, but there are still reasons for hope, even reasons to celebrate. Harvard and the University of Haifa, and the tireless pursuits that they inspire and enable, have never been more important to society than they are now. I hope you find joy in that truth, offered with esteem for your university community, now also my university community, and for its commitment to providing opportunities for all people to grow in both knowledge and wisdom. Your efforts to build a multiversity connected across campuses as well as fields and disciplines will create incredible opportunities for Israel and for the world. Thank you again for giving me the gift of membership in another one of the world's great academic communities, a wonderful community of learning. I hope to have the chance to express my gratitude to all of you before too long in person. But until then, please know that you have my sincere thanks for this very, very great honor. Thank you very much. Toda Rabah.
Larry, that was a fascinating talk. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. For the Q&A session, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator, Professor Deborah Schmueli of the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. Professor Schmueli is also head of the National Knowledge and Research Center for Emergency Readiness. She is an exceptional scientist, and let's not forget, she's a former student of Professor Bacow.
Thank you, Professor Robin, for the introduction, and thank you, President Bacow, for your thoughtful and enlightening talk. I wish I were doing this in person, which is impossible in this period of COVID, but it's a very special thrill for me to be participating in honoring you, President Lawrence Bacow, who's been my teacher, advisor, mentor, and friend for so many years. This is an opportunity to express just some of my appreciation for you in words. Larry, you have qualities which shine through with unwavering consistency, whether you're interacting with students, mentees, academic communities, in your capacities as head of the faculty and chancellor at MIT, president of Tufts, president of Harvard, or in your personal life as doting husband to Adele, father to Jay and Kenny, grandfather and friend. These qualities include integrity, fairness, empathy, loyalty, and modesty. Your brilliance is combined with keen analytical ability and your reflective approach to problem solving. We'd like to make this part of the ceremony interactive to the extent that this format allows. You, the participants, can share your questions for President Bacow in the following manner. On the platform's main stage, you'll find a section under the viewing window entitled, "Do you have a question? Ask us." Please write your questions in the space allotted, press submit, and we'll see your questions and relay as many as time permits to Dr. Bacow. I'll begin with a few of my own. So, in light of COVID and other societal issues, is the college and research university model that we've been accustomed to for the last 150 years about to change? And if so, how?
Well, first of all, Deborah, it's great to share this conversation with you. I also want to say thank you again to President Robin for his kind words, for yours as well, and to Fred and Brad, and Sharon and Jay, and everybody who's been involved with this. Colleges and universities, I think, get tagged with being ossified, with being resistant to change. But in fact, change occurs, tends to occur over a longer time constant than perhaps in other organizations. So I think the model of the research university is actually quite durable, but also adaptive. I think certainly the pandemic will bring changes. We're already seeing those. Some of these changes are quite positive, as I referred to in my remarks. Certainly in Boston, it's helped to build a form of interinstitutional collaboration, which I'd like to think will be durable and will last beyond the pandemic. It's also the case that we've discovered that we're able to communicate with each other in ways that we didn't quite appreciate perhaps before. So I think that going forward, people are likely to travel less. That's probably good in reducing our collective carbon footprint, but it will also give us the opportunity to import into our classroom, scholars from around the world. Here I am parachuting into a conversation in Haifa, but also we can bring you into our classroom back into Cambridge. That only good things will come of that.
Yeah, that's optimistic, and it sounds good. Another question. You referred to the events at the U.S. Capitol and the gross inequities that the COVID crisis exposed. What kind of active role can research universities play in narrowing these societal divisions?
Good question. I think there are a number of things which we can do. Certainly, at Harvard, faculty in all of our schools are deeply involved right now in, and have been for some time, in trying to address the inequities that have been certainly laid bare by this pandemic. So at the Graduate School of Education, we have faculty who are focused, highly on some of the challenges that poor students of color are facing in learning under the current conditions, but also more broadly. The law school faculty are focused on issues of access to justice, which perpetuates and gives rise to social injustice and inequality. At the Graduate School of Design, people are focused on issues of access to housing and the challenges there. I could go on. I think scholars have much to contribute in both identifying what the sources of inequality are in our society, but also suggesting ways of addressing and counteracting those sources of inequality. I also think, though, that we have a fair amount to contribute as institutions in getting people to understand, in some cases, the fragility of our democracies. I think we take far too much for granted, not just in this country, but in others. A couple of my colleagues in the government department at Harvard a few years back, Steve Levitsky and Dan Ziblatt, wrote a book called How Democracies Die. I think scholars need to continue to remind us that we as citizens need to invest our time and our effort in order to sustain democracy. And I don't think we should ever lose sight of the fact that the original purpose of higher education was to educate citizens for a democracy.
Thank you. So when you referred to prior research which underlies, say, GPS technology and the roots of mRNA vaccines, it seems that we were just really lucky that those brilliant scientists worked on these basic problems out of curiosity some 40 to 60 years ago. Given that we are currently very aware of the immense challenges of climate change, What can we do now so that we're again lucky 30 years from now and able to meet the challenges head on?
Well, this is a case where I don't think we need to be lucky. I think we actually know what we need to do right now. First, the science of climate change is well established. I mean, there are few people who will contest it, but among serious scholars, it's accepted. Climate change is real. It's anthropogenic. We need to act. We need to act sooner rather than later. The big challenge, I think, lies in a problem not so much of science, but one of economics and politics. And that is that this is, as you know, because you studied this and you teach it now, this is a classic case of the tragedy of the commons. We need collective action. We need collective action across multiple jurisdictions. We need countries to lead and to lead by example. And here I'm embarrassed to say that my own country has not done as well as it should, both by abandoning the Paris Accords. I'm pleased to say that appears that we're going to re-engage with them. We also do need technological change and progress that will continue to bring, to make it easier to adapt and mitigate the impacts of climate change. We need to think hard about putting a price on carbon. We need to do a better job of making certain types of technologies affordable through technological innovation, whether or not we're talking about wind or solar power, a better battery design to be able to store energy over periods of time when we can't count on renewable resources to actually generate energy in real time. So there's lots to be done, but the really big problems, I think, lie not in what new science needs to be done now, but mustering the political and social will to address the problems which we know that are very real.
So the pandemic has made us face a new reality, and alongside the bad, there's good, and you've mentioned some of it. Are there any other things that you'd like to take with you once we see the true end to this crisis, if not to the virus itself, of the good parts?
Well, the enforced isolation, I also think, has helped for people to reach out to others that they otherwise wouldn't do. I think many of us right now are scheduling, regular Zoom calls with extended family members, with old friends from college or other parts of our life. I hope one of the things which might come from the pandemic is that we, as a society, will find ourselves more connected than we were in the past. I also hope that we will find ways to do what we're doing that are more inclusive. My wife, Adele, early on in the pandemic, said that she thought that one of the consequences of everybody working from home, and this is my study in the president's house at Harvard. I haven't been in my own office in a year now. March 13th was the last time I was there. But Adele said that she thought that one of the advantages of the pandemic is that it's likely to encourage us to be more creative and flexible in how it is that people work in the future. And that now that men like me have been forced to work from home, we can see that one can do so productively, and that maybe going forward, one of the big beneficiaries will be women of childbearing age who often have had to struggle while juggling both personal and professional responsibilities, but will be more open to new ways of how women might engage and work while juggling responsibilities that disproportionately women continue to bear in society. So I think I could go on. I think there are lots of potential benefits. Only time will tell. As I like to tell people, I left my crystal ball in my office in Massachusetts Hall when I left it. So your guess is as good as mine on many of these issues.
To see what that ball shows when you get back. But
never bet against Zell.
Yeah, we have a few questions which have arrived from our audience. So the first is, what is the most important step that academic institutions can take to close gaps in access to higher education among minority and underserved or marginalized populations?
So, here I think that we we need to recognize a number of truths. One of them is that talent is flatly distributed, but opportunity is not. We can find proportionately as many brilliant people, as many highly motivated, highly qualified people almost anywhere in the world. But the opportunities that those people have are often disproportionate to the resources that are at their disposal. So I think that imposes obligations on institutions like ours to look hard for really, really talented people who may not have otherwise come to the attention of others. Several years ago, Harvard, in collaboration with MIT, created something known as edX, where we started to distribute, our course content on the web for free to students from around the world. What's interesting as a result of that is that we now have students who are enrolled at Harvard and at MIT, I should add, who come from places that in a million years we probably never would have expected them to come to our institutions. The talented ninth grader who succeeded in Afghanistan in going online and taking our Introduction to Computer Science course and acing it. That student now is enrolled at Harvard. So I think each of us need to look at how we can open the doors to our institutions. And again, here I'm optimistic because I think that the pandemic has greatly accelerated our willingness to embrace technology and distance learning in the way in which we might engage the world more broadly. It's allowed us to open up our institutions and the resources within them to students, to learners, adult learners throughout the world. We have people right now who are participating in lectures, in seminars, who are virtually wandering the halls of our museums that never could have done this before. And I think that that's a way in which academic institutions throughout the world can help to open the aperture of the lens, which reaches out to the world more broadly. And we should continue to do that.
There was a wonderful article about that program about a month ago in the Times, and it really gives a lot of hope. We now have a question from our Dean of Social Sciences. What's the secret way to successfully drive a cultural change at a university?
Well, I always say that the best way to bring about change in a university is to have people steal your ideas and claim them as their own. So as academic leaders, we find ourselves in the position where we frequently are able to frame issues in ways that allow people to see that there might be a better way of doing something. And so we need to do that. We need to identify those folks who have great ideas and empower them and encourage them and to nurture them. We need to recognize that none of us has a monopoly on good ideas, and that as and I know President Robin would agree with this statement, that our job as academic administrators is to enable our faculty to do their best work, their best teaching, their best scholarship. And so we need to listen carefully, but we also need to be willing to prod and to push and to experiment, as well as to fail. Just as I said in my remarks, we tolerate failure in the laboratory. We tolerate failure in our scholarship. That's how we do better in understanding the world. We need to be willing to be bold and experiment in bringing about change within the institution. We will never get everything right. In fact, the challenge in life is to make new mistakes. So let's keep trying. When we don't get things right, let's fix them and go on and try something else. But I think it's that process of continuous innovation, encouraging people to bring us ideas, empowering those who want to try things differently, and giving credit broadly where credit is due. That's how we bring about change.
Excellent suggestions. Another question from the audience. Do you think there are silver linings to long-distance learning? Sure.
There are definitely silver linings to long-distance learning. partly what it does is that it allows some people to get an education who otherwise would not be able to. Just one example from Harvard again during the pandemic. Early on in the pandemic, we decided that for the fall semester of this past year, that we as an institution would be all remote. All of our instruction would be online, even in those cases where we had some students, here on campus. We would start that way, and as we could, open things up to in-class instruction. The dean of our graduate school of education, Bridget Terry Long, realized that given that the bulk of the students at the ed school are enrolled in one-year professional master's programs, it wouldn't be practical just to be online for one semester. That if they were going to be online for the semester, they should be online for the entire year, because people could not uproot themselves mid-year, move to Cambridge if we started teaching in person. So the ed school was all online for the year. When she did that, she realized that since most of their students come from the education sector already, teachers, academic administrators, she's thought to herself, well, if people are going to be all online and studying remotely, we should give them the opportunity to complete these degrees, not in 1 year, but over 2 years. And if we did that, they could keep their jobs. And then having realized that, she reopened admissions, recognizing that if people had known that in advance, lots more people perhaps would have wanted to enroll at the Graduate School of Education for a master's degree than would otherwise. Bottom line is twice as many people applied for admission during this 5-week new summer admission cycle as did during the regular admission cycle. We admitted a new group of students. 93% of them accepted our offers of admissions. And now we're actually reaching a much, much larger group of new students. So I think that there's huge potential and opportunity there, not just for our Graduate School of Education, but for some of our other schools going forward. And I think for colleges and universities around the world. There are many people who would love to get an education, but cannot take time out of their professional lives, especially adult learners, to go to school full time. I think that imposes some obligation on many of us to feel, to recognize how we can reach them.
And that flexibility was really quite a policy window that made a difference.
Absolutely.
Another question from the audience. You've been outspoken in calling to loosen immigration restrictions. What's your latest position on what needs to change about U.S. immigration policy, specifically due to its impact on higher education?
So I mentioned in my in the video that preceded this that both of my parents were immigrants. They were both refugees. I have a special feeling and affinity for those who come to our country, and many who've come to Israel. Why have people settled in our country? In many cases, it's because they are in search of either freedom or opportunity. And higher education, I think this plays a special role. Harvard is home to more foreign scholars than any other university in the United States. A third of our faculty were born someplace else. It's also the case that 25% of our students come from abroad. We live in a world right now where the only truly scarce capital is human capital. Israel has demonstrated to the world that a country or a region doesn't need to be rich in natural resources in order to be a wealthy country. But how does Israel do that? Israel does it by creating and aggregating and acting as a magnet for human capital, by drawing people to Israel from around the world who come to Israel's universities to study. People who are attracted to Israel by the opportunity that exists, startup nation. And so that's true for Israel. I think it's true for other countries as well. And historically, our country has been a beacon of hope and opportunity for others. And sadly, we've gone through a period in which we have, I think, failed to appreciate the historic role that we've played in the world in attracting talented immigrants who just want to create better lives and opportunities, not just for themselves, but for their children and grandchildren. And so it's why I will continue to advocate for immigration, but also for being more open to the particular plight of those who seek to come to our country, the United States, in search of freedom where they've been denied it elsewhere.
Okay, another question from the audience, and they start thanking you very much for your wonderful talk. Despite the impressive opportunities of online teaching, learning, discussion literary worldwide, I am a bit afraid that we lose the incidental meetings, the chance encounters, the not planned, not organized communication, the surprise, and unpredicted inspiration. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I would agree 100%. One of the brilliant things of residential education is that it's a full contact sport. If most of us on this call who had the benefit or the privilege of studying in a residential learning environment, by that I mean, where we live with our fellow students on campus, if we interact with our faculty members, in a classroom, if we go through the mental exercise of saying, what's the most memorable experience that we had during our time in college? My guess is that most of us would recall something that occurred outside of a classroom. Either it was a conversation that had occurred with our fellow students late at night, long after classes were over, or it was a conversation that occurred perhaps with a faculty member after a class, where we may have gone up and asked a question. Certainly my life was changed by a conversation that I had with one of my professors who invited me back to his office afterwards to talk about the question that I had. And that led to a relationship that continues to this day. I often say the single best predictor of whether or not a student at any institution has a great experience in college is whether or not they get to know at least one faculty member well enough so that they stay in touch with them for the rest of their life. And here, Deborah, you and I are having this conversation now, 40 some years after we both first met. I think you were 7 and I was 12 at the time. So there's something magical that happens when we can find students and faculty under temperature and pressure for 4 years. And, I don't want to lose that. That said, not every student will have that opportunity. And so we need to capitalize on the technologies that have been created, that we've learned how to use through this pandemic, again, to try and open the gates of higher education ever more broadly to people who otherwise would not be able to pursue higher education in a residential setting. I also think that for those of us who lead residential universities, we need to do what we can to make sure that they are open and accessible to students regardless of their ability to pay. And I think, Harvard is fortunate that we have the kinds of resources so that we can do that. Not every institution is so lucky.
Here's a question from a student at Harvard Law. How can Harvard best serve as a role model for other institutions and for everyday people in promoting, securing, and protecting the rights of people with actual or perceived permanent or temporary disabilities and health conditions?
So I always say that we need to model the behavior that we would hope to see in the rest of the world. And this exists in so many different dimensions. Whether or not it's having difficult conversations about difficult issues. I often say if we can't make that work at a place like Harvard, where everybody is smart, where people don't live in fear of their lives, I would hope nobody goes to bed hungry. If we can't make this work on our beautiful campus, there's no hope for the rest of the world. Similarly, if an institution which is blessed with the kinds of resources that Harvard is blessed with can't make our campus accessible to people who are talented, but people with differences, who have been raised, who've lived with disabilities or differently abled, then shame on us. We need to do a better job of doing this There's still work to be done. We are far from perfect, and I don't mean to suggest that we are. But while we may not be perfect, we almost always must strive to be better. And as I've learned, one of the consequences of being Harvard is that people pay a lot of attention to what we do, which just, I think, raises the bar, the expectations that we ought to have for ourselves.
Thank you. Well, this honorary doctorate ceremony is not an ordinary one. The backdrop is a pandemic that created a unique year on a global scale with many common experiences and challenges. We're connecting online people from vast geographical distances who nevertheless are deeply connected by common values, friendship, and devotion to advancing humanity through the pursuit of knowledge and truth. Larry, your speech and the ensuing Q&A session shed light on various aspects of this confusing reality. Beyond that, your friendship is deeply valued to me personally, to the University of Haifa, and to the State of Israel. Many thanks, Larry, and thank you all for participating. And now we'll go back to you, Ron.
Thank you, Deborah, for leading this discussion, and thank you again, Larry, for your analysis. To conclude this very meaningful evening, I'm deeply honored to invite Jay and Shira Ruderman, senior members of the University of Haifa's Board of Governors and longtime supporters of the university, who have significantly contributed to the success of this event. Jay and Shira, please.
Thank you, Brad and Ron. President Bacow, during this ceremony, we heard about your many wonderful professional achievements, which makes today's presentation of an honorary doctorate from the University of Haifa so well deserved. But Shira and I would like to emphasize another aspect of your life that is in our eyes equally admirable, and that is your values that shape your professional life. Whenever Shira and I approached you, you always made yourself available and accessible to us, no matter how busy you were. Many people who know you mention how much they enjoy meeting and talking to you, and how you give your full attention to whoever you meet. You have a very large staff at Harvard, and nevertheless, you know each one of them by his or her first name. From conversations with your friends, I also learned that you always make sure that your first and foremost commitment is to your family. I think this quote by President Jimmy Carter captures your essence. What are the things you can't see that are important? I would say justice, truth, humility, service, compassion, love. You can't see any of those, but they're the guiding lights of life.
In your quiet and humbled way, you show your knowledge and commitment to your Jewish values. Through small actions, like adding a mezuzah to the president's house, to shaping major policies. Guided by your family's history as Holocaust survivors, you became an example to so many people, both outside and inside the Jewish world. I learned we share a passion for social justice through public service. Your global impact does not mean you shy away from being involved in individual cases. As Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. And this is why we're here today. We are honored to call you a friend. Mazal Tov.
To everyone who has joined us this memorable evening, a special thank you from all of us. We wish you all a healthy and successful 2021 and look forward to sharing a bright future with you in person in Haifa. Laila Tov, good night.